Hello, I hope you're having a wonderful day. This is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the word cash flow. Of course, I've seen around, and you probably have as well, and it's become a very successful kind of a branding word that someone has used in regards to not just as far as generating a topic to discuss, but also to sell a lot of shirts and hats and so forth. But kind of that word cash flow. You may see, some business owners wearing it on their shirts, or people wearing it on their shirts, and it's kind of one of the bravado type of words. I think a lot of it has to do with the individual that is kind of branding it. As an accountant, the word cash flow to me isn't necessarily a bravado word, but it's very much a word that is extremely important for a business owner to understand. One of the topics, of course, that we talk about with our clients is really kind of discussing how can we make your business, or how can you make your business more profitable? What are some things that we need to look at? But cash flow is one of those things that becomes a little bit more difficult to understand. In prior episodes, we have talked about cash flows and cash flow statements, and of course, encourage you to go back and listen to those. And we'll talk about it more in future episodes as we shift and transition a little more to talking about facts regarding cash flows. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the myths or the statements that you'll hear, or maybe even you yourself at different times may have thought as it relates to cash flow. Cash flow is the lifeblood of a business. I think that's fairly straightforward. Just like our bodies run on blood, without blood and everything that's involved in it, it's we're essentially not going to live. If we get a disease in our blood, we're probably not going to live very long. Same thing with cash flow. If we don't have cash coming in, our business is going to die. But also, if we don't manage that cash flow well, the business will die. And it may be a slow bleed out, or it may be a quick bleed out. But if that cash flow is not managed well, and if there's not an understanding by the owner and those who manage that cash flow as to how to go about managing the cash flow and having those conversations, sometimes they're difficult conversations, the business will not survive in the long term. So I'm just going to rattle off here just a few different statements that I've heard in different forms or fashion as it relates to cash flow. And all of these are really just myths. They're not necessarily true at all. And then I'll make a closing statement. Like I said, in future weeks, we'll at some point in the future, we'll start to get into a little bit more on the facts. But I will make a closing statement at the end of this podcast that I think you may find a little bit helpful. So common statements or myths regarding cash flow. First of all, if I have more sales, I'll have more cash flow. You go through, you look at a profit and loss statement, you look at your top line revenue. Well, if that number goes up, that means I'll have more cash flow. Okay, well, even if you collect all of every single dollar that you collect in revenue, yes, you'll have cash flow. You'll have cash coming in, cash going out, but it does not mean that your business is healthy. Okay, so what I really want to kind of hammer out here is kind of understanding that we're really looking at the right type of cash flow, and what does that actually mean? So if I have more sales, I have more cash flow. Well, even if you have more sales, it doesn't mean that that you necessarily may collect on everything. You may not have the right type of sales. You may not be managing the other side of the ledger well. If my business is profitable, I'll have adequate cash flow. We have clients that actually do have profitable businesses, but they are big-time cash flow negative. And this can be for a number of reasons. And I'm it's going to be way past the point of this podcast. But just looking at your profit and loss statement and not understanding the effect of cash and what's happening with that net income, if you don't have an understanding on that and a control and managing that, your business will not succeed. Just because your business is profitable does not mean that you have a healthy cash flow into your business. If I have cash in the bank, I have good cash flow. Well, think about it. I mean, a startup could have $1 million in the bank. Okay, do they have adequate cash flow? Do they have proper cash flow? No, none of that cash is theirs. They borrowed it from someplace. They put their own money into the business, whatever the case may be. Yeah, they have cash in the bank. Okay, or a business can, they go through and they're rolling along and they're collecting money, but they haven't paid any of their vendors. Yeah, they have money in the bank, but guess what? Their business is not healthy. They are not, at the end of the day, they are going to end up cash negative if they're honest and they pay all of their bills. Managing cash flow in my business is somebody else's responsibility. It's the bookkeeper's responsibility to manage the cash flow. It's my CFO, my integrator, my finance team, or my accountant. It's their responsibility to manage the cash flow. And I'm going to say, you as a business owner, know it's your responsibility to make sure that you manage that cash flow. that you have a really good understanding where's that cash coming in, where's it going out the door, and who's involved in that process. Next, if I need more cash, I'll just get another loan to float the business for a while. I'll close in that gap by going out and just finding more cash. Because guess what? I know that eventually I'll be able to pay it. Okay. And once again, that's cash flow. I mean, technically it is more cash coming into the business and it'll be more cash going out of the business, but it's not the right type of cash flow. People owe me money. So eventually my cash flow will be just fine. And so in some businesses, their accounts receivable, they collect a very high percentage. In other businesses, that number is not that high. As an accountant, even at any given time, I look at my accounts receivable regularly in my business, and there are some clients that we've done work for. I don't know if I'll ever get paid. And we try to do a good job on the front end evaluating on, who is this client able and willing and do they have integrity to pay, but that always doesn't happen. And then we can sometimes end up with external reasons why that all of our accounts receivable may not be collected. We have a lot of clients in the real estate space that own rental properties. And there are times we have some clients around the country that they're doing very well collecting their rents. We have others that not so much. That the people that are living in the houses, they're not able to pay the rent, and or there's moratoriums out there on evictions, and so people just don't pay their rent. And those businesses are struggling. Why? Because they're not having cash flow coming in, but they're still building them, but they're not collecting it. So kind of an understanding that just because there's a line on there of accounts receivables, that you'll eventually collect all of it. So people owe me money, so my cash flow will be fine eventually. That's not always true. Next, my business lives from week to week like my employees do, and this is the way the small business works. My business operates kind of week to week or by month to month, and it's just the way that business is supposed to happen, especially as a small business. And that's not at all true. And unfortunately, many people kind of take their principles as it relates to personal finances, and maybe they came from a time of being an employee and they were just used to getting a paycheck, and they were living kind of week to week or every other week or month to month, and they just kind of just figure that it's the way that business just works. Everybody else they know, that's kind of the way their business works, and it's just the way business works. Business isn't meant to have good cash flow. It's kind of meant just to kind of live month to month, and that's not definitely at all the case. Last thing I've jotted down here is I have a budget, so my cash flow will be just fine if I follow it. Okay, so a budget is, of course, essential. I think it is important for a business to have a budget, but just because you have a budget in place, and even going beyond that, even if you follow that budget, does not mean that your cash flow will be fine. Okay, so cash flow is kind of one of those items that is going to stand alone. It's going to be one of those areas in your business you are going to need to look at, and you're going to need to look at it frequently. I don't mean daily; it'll drive you nuts. But I would say probably as a business owner, at least weekly, understanding cash flow. When I talk about cash flow, I'm specifically talking about that free cash flow. That cash flow that is unencumbered, that is truly yours as the business owner to be able to invest back into the business, to be able to pull from the business if need be, whatever the case may be. But you have a plan for that cash flow, but understanding what is that free cash flow, not just, what are my bank balances? Many times, we'll talk to clients, and that's one of the metrics they look at. Oh, how much money do I have in the bank? That number is essentially really kind of meaningless. Okay, it's the money in the bank is important, but what are we doing with that money? Where's that money promised? Where's additional money coming in, and understanding that flow of cash in your business. So the key is figuring out what cash flow is actually yours. What is that free cash flow, and how am I going to manage the cash flow? Because if I don't have an understanding of what my free cash flow is, and I don't have a good understanding of how to manage my cash flow, my business will never ever reach the point of being healthy. I appreciate you taking a few moments to listen to the podcast today. Once again, this is the Belk on Business podcast. I would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Have a wonderful day.